Entonces, saludarlas a todas, a todos, agradecer mucho al profesor Kokoras, que hoy día va a darnos esta conferencia, y invitarles a revisar, si no es ahora en directo, después este video de este encuentro en las redes de la Facultad de Artes. Doy la palabra a Federico.
Hola, buenas tardes a todas y todos, y particularmente bienvenido Panayiotis Kokoras, profesor. Les voy a leer brevemente una introducción biográfica de nuestro invitado y vamos a darle la palabra para comenzar inmediatamente. Panayiotis Kokoras es compositor y músico del ámbito de la computación, innovador e internacionalmente premiado. Actualmente es profesor asociado de composición y director del Centro para la Música Experimental e Intermedialidad en la Universidad del Norte de Texas. Nacido en Grecia, estudió guitarra clásica y composición en Atenas y en York, Inglaterra, y ha enseñado en la Universidad Aristóteles en Tesaloniki. Las composiciones sonoras de Kokoras utilizan el sonido como su única unidad estructural. Su concepto de textura musical holofónica propone que cada sonido independiente, fonos, contribuye igualmente a la síntesis del total, holos. Tanto en sus piezas instrumentales como electroacústicas, su música apela a una virtuosidad del sonido, una escritura hiperidiomática cuyo énfasis en la producción precisa de posibilidades sonoras variables y la correcta distinción entre un timbre y otro para transmitir las ideas musicales y estructura de la pieza. Sus procesos composicionales también son informados por la investigación en Music Information Retrieval, técnicas táctiles extendidas, hiperidiomaticidad del sonido y conciencia robótica. Se puede visitar su trabajo en su página web www.panayiotiskokoras.com. Ya la copiaremos en el chat para todos. Hoy, Panayiotis, el profesor ha aceptado esta invitación por parte de los estudiantes del doctorado para ser parte del coloquio de nuestro posgrado 2021, y con la presentación titulada en inglés Becoming Sound from Chamanism to Quantum Listening, que podríamos traducir como Deviniendo Sonido, del chamanismo a la escucha cuántica. Así que, with no further introduction, Panayiotis, you can start when you want.
Thank you, Federico, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to share with you my thoughts and then have some time for questions, discussion, as you wish. So yeah, as you heard, my name is Panayiotis Kokoras. I'm a composer, born in Greece, currently working and living in Texas, USA. And I'm director of the University at the University of North Texas of the Center for Experimental Music and Intermedia. Maybe I can share right away my screen. We'll have a lot of slides to show you. So while I'm talking about UNT, Center for Experimental Music and Intermedia, it's a concert hall, part of it, which has a 37.2 sound dome ambisonics diffusion system. It has 5 screens for 4K high definition for projection, 50 lights. So it's a really great place for me to be and to work. SEMI also has several studios, which are most of them 8.1, and they have various capabilities. And without further ado, I will move to my presentation. As you've heard, the title is Becoming Sound from Shamanism to Quantum Listening. And this kind of summarizes a lot of the ideas I'm using and working with over the last decades. So as the title suggests, for me, sound is my main and only material. There's nothing less than that, right? But first, I will explain that furthermore. I would like to turn this slide and explain a little bit what is sound, right? And what am I talking about? You see on the top of it, I have this music, noise, sound, sensation, perception, music, right? So the order could be actually scrabbled, and it will not change much the point I'm making here. So sound is basically air molecules, right, on the air propagating in some certain frequency. And then they hit our inner ear, the membrane has the tympan, and then this mechanical energy eventually becomes electrical energy. Then our inner ear, somewhere around here, converts that to electrochemical signal that goes through our nerve, the nerves here, into our auditory cortex, the area of our brain that processes sound. And then we say, oh, I've heard it. I hear sound. But there was nothing like that in the first place, right? It was just air molecules vibrating. So that makes me think that sound, for the most part, is in here. It's in our brain. Okay, it shows up at the very last moment in our brains. So sound does not exist, in fact. It's a creation of our mind. And then we say, yeah, sound, and then music, which was what it is supposed to be right from the beginning, but actually it wasn't. This whole process called acoustic transduction, it's very well researched, and it also makes us think if music is also, if we need sound to make music. There is even a research, there's a book by a researcher called The Sound of Thought, and he explains in his book that actually we don't need sound to have a sensation of music. And that's the experiments he did was with language. Just by reading a text, we activate certain parts of our brain which are the same as if we listen to the same text, which is a very interesting observation. So yeah, sound, very elusive part of our world, yet very important. So this is the only, I will move to the next slide, a little kind of automated presentation. So having sound as my main material for composing had to change everything in my process. So I do not use melodies in my music, since sound for me is the main unit. I don't have harmonies. It gets more scary. No pitches really, no rhythm, form, tempo, the way of time, I consider it in a different way. Dynamics not so useful anymore because the sound defines also the dynamic levels for the most part, textures. You've heard about holophonic musical texture, themes, motives, idiomaticism, and standard instrumental sound. Not my thing. You will barely hear. I don't neglect that. It's clearly part of my vocabulary, but it's just one small part of it. There is certainly more to it. So this frames up a little bit the way of my work and how I'm thinking about it. And I don't mean that I don't use any of those, because if I don't use any of those, then what do I use, right? I do use textures, and you just heard about holophonic musical texture. So I had to define what texture musical texture is to me and to the way I make music. Of course, I use form, but again, changing the materials, form could be something different, and I will have to redefine how do I think about form. It's like you try to make a house, a tall building with clay, right? It cannot go very tall, it will collapse. Clay is not as strong to make tall, big buildings. So if you change the material, however, clay is very flexible, so you can make dome-like houses with round windows and things like that, because it's very flexible and very easy to control its shape. However, if you turn into bricks, then you go taller. Brick is stronger material, but it's not as flexible. It's more block-like structures. So the material changes everything, and therefore even changes the way we live inside this structure, right? So the implications are very deep. And that's what happened when I compose sound. And I don't compose with sound, I compose sound, right? There is nothing in between me and the sound, and in the end, I become sound. And I will explain why I say that too. So moving on maybe to another slide. Not scroll down. Strange. Trying to work a little bit my presentation. Let me stop my share and I will start it again because it seems to be stuck a little bit.
Yeah, take it easy, go ahead, no problem.
I can do that right now.
Me disculpo que había olvidado mencionar que no va a haber traducción simultánea, sino que el profesor ha preparado una presentación con muchas láminas y mucha explicación, pero sí vamos a tener traducción para la sección de preguntas. Nos va a estar apoyando Manuel Delano de nuestro magíster, así que pueden pensar en preguntas, anotarlas por aquí y las vamos a ir haciendo al profesor.
Well, I cannot actually stop my share now. I don't know why. Let's continue like that. I guess, I don't know, something's is blocking me from doing that. So one of the things, therefore, I had to change was the way I approach the medium. There is a known phrase by a philosopher, sociologist, Marcel McLuhan. He says, the medium is a message. So for me, that phrase could be a little bit rephrased, and I will explain what I mean. But here is an example. I'll try to play. Let's see. It doesn't even play that now. So certainly I have a problem here. So I cannot even stop it or get out of it. It's very strange. I will have to maybe, I'm sorry about that, I don't know what happens. It doesn't play, and I cannot even click anything outside. You may lose me for a moment. I may have to restart. I don't know. Okay?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay. You're going to disconnect?
Possibly, yes.
No. Take it easy, these things happen. Estamos esperando al profesor Panayiotis Kokoras que pueda resolver el problema de en su computadora en un momento para poder hacer, sobre todo para poder hacer sonar los ejemplos sonoros musicales.
Lo perdí por un momento.
Lo perdimos, perdimos profesor por un momento.
Fede, quizás podrías como hacer un baby resumen de lo que pasó recién, como para quienes no hablen inglés, no sé, como
Sí.
Me aprovechamos el tiempo, digo.
Me parece buena idea, Luis.
Sí, bueno, después de presentar un poco algo de infraestructura con la que trabaja el profesor, básicamente contó esta especie de definición, si se pudiera decir, de su música, en la cual él nos contaba cómo es posible que no trabaje con un montón de atributos, ¿no es verdad?, que él iba tachando, que se supone que tiene la música, ¿no es verdad?, donde iba tachando prácticamente todo, uno no sabía qué iba quedando, ¿no?, después de tachar el ritmo, la melodía, la armonía, pero decía también la textura, también la forma, ¿no? Y esto por la idea previa que había señalado de que el sonido en el exterior, fuera de nuestra mente, no es más que moléculas moviéndose, y que en realidad es posible que no haya una música allí, sino que todo esté ocurriendo, ahí está volviendo el profesor, en nuestra percepción, y por lo tanto esa es su aproximación al trabajo sonoro. A ver si ya está.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. I'm back. So let me share back my screen and continue.
Was very quick.
Sometimes I guess it happens. Okay.
I was like resuming a little bit what you were saying, so
nice.
You can continue.
Thank you. So here we have a sound I was trying to play before. I'll play it one more time. And you may already know what the sound is. Guesses, it's a sound of a door, an old door shutting on the closed. And then I have another sound here. Okay, and this is a cello sound, which, as you can hear, it resembles quite well the sound of the door shutting. Therefore, for me, there's no difference between actually it's a door or it's a cello. The medium that generates the sound is not as important, but the sound itself, right? Because I can make a sounding like a door regardless the medium. So for me, the sound is both the medium and the message. So it's very central. Then speaking about form, this is a piece I composed a few years ago called Hiss and Whistle for a duo in Switzerland called and Jip. And this is the structure of the form, this waveform. And basically what this is me preparing a cup of tea. I'll play a little bit of that. And actually that long black waveform here is the moment where the boiler, the teapot, which is boiling the water for the tea, is boiling, which is in that process, it's the longest. In the piece, it's not as long because it's kind of boring, right? You're waiting the water to boil. So I don't take it literally, but for the most part, it follows the form of me preparing the tea. So for example, in my real life tea preparation, the first thing to do is to pour water inside the teapot, right? They did it all at once. The float, just a little bit more. I prepare a few things, like the bag. I'm turning on the stove. And then I'm waiting the boiling point. And then towards the end, I will put the tea bag inside the hot water, and I will pour the water inside the pot. Okay, so in the piece, that sounds a little bit different. I will play with the beginning. The process of putting the water, it's repeated 3 times, for instance. I don't do it just once. One time. I'll just move to the end where I've boiled the water and I'm about to drink it. Where is it? This is just electronic medium, which is me with extra elements that I added to my real recording. Right. So that's an example, a demonstration of how form could be formed by the sound itself, by a sound process, right? So it's not something like an abstract conception saying, okay, the number of 10 will be divided by 5, and then those 2 sections will structure my piece, or we're going to use a sonata form, or whatever it is. Each time will be different, because there is a different sound that defines the process of structuring, of forming the piece. But the source of it is the sound itself. So that's about form a little bit. Speaking about texture, we talked a little bit about holophonic musical texture, and the definition of it. I will give you a few examples so that you can understand what this in terms of sound. And here this illustrates a little bit a potential progression of the musical textures. So we start from monophonic to polyphonic to homophonic texture. And holophonic texture could be what I suggest as we take different sound streams that fuse together and make one single sonic experience, right? We cannot decompose it into its components. It's different elements. Once it's formed, it's fused, and that's a perceptual phenomenon. So how that works, I have here a few examples. This is the 4 voices, like it's a quartet, right? We have this section fan, then we have this, then we have another one, and then this one. If now try to put those 4 sounds in your mind together, what is the sound you will hear? Is this one. And what is this sound? Can you guess? It's a vacuum cleaner, right? The sound of a vacuum cleaner. So when you hear the sound of the vacuum cleaner, you don't say, oh, here is the section fan tone, here's the motor, here's the airflow, and so on. You just hear the sound of the vacuum cleaner. But this is a synthesis of multiple different streams that come together. Okay, that's a real life holophonic musical texture that happens everywhere pretty much. A car engine has multiple sounds coming out of it if we could isolate them. A train, anything, any machine pretty much. So how that then translates into music, here I have a little example from a piece of mine called Hippo, which is for violin, piano, and clarinet. So bars 23 to 29. Let's hear first the violin. Right? Let's hear the piano. And then let's hear the clarinet. And now let's imagine them and hear them together. And as with every music in the past, when I say I'm composing a holophonic musical texture, it doesn't mean I don't have monophonic textures in my pieces or polyphonic. Same with Beethoven. Beethoven was composing homophonic texture, but in the middle of his symphony, he has a solo oboe, which is monophonic, right? So it doesn't mean one cancels the others. They are our way of understanding the musical phenomenon becomes just richer. There is more to it. So you've heard now a little moment where this is happening. So that's in a nutshell what holophonic musical texture is. And of course you heard all these classical instruments not sounding very classical, right? The clarinet was not really a typical clarinet. And I'm going there. So since sound for me is my main and only unit, I need sounds, right? I need, the more sounds I have, the more words I have, and then better poems I can make. If you have just 10 words, how many poems you can make, right? If you have a lot of words, you can make better poems. So I'm constantly in search of sounds. Therefore, just taking the bow and bowing on the string, the ordinario, for me, that's a sound, right? How much can I say? It's and anyway, it's been said pretty much everything you can say with this way, with these words. I need more words. If I have a computer machine in front of me, I need to give it a name because it's a new new expression for me. It's a new concept. I need a word. If there's no words, there's no meaning. And there is no sounds, there's no much I can say, right? So here I have a little workflow, but also how I deal with this problem, right? Speaking before for form, this is the idea of how I started a piece, how I'm inspired by, right? So in this piece was called Michelangelo's Empire Turbine. I was in Mexico City, actually, not Mexico City, in Querétaro, in Mexico, in this hangar. And it was a very noisy place, actually, with all these fans. It was almost like an installation for me. It had all these percussive sounds, this whistling sounds. So that experience captured. I did record it with my recordable device. I video clipped it. It wasn't just an accident. Accidentally, I showed up there and I had that experience which captured my attention. And then I went home, let's say, and I wrote a piece from this. But to write a piece, I needed more than what the instruments can do. How can I can work on these materials, sound materials, with the traditional instruments? It will be hard. It will be very distant, the connection, that it wouldn't satisfy me. So I had to modify the instruments in this case. So I used the ratchet to make this piece. This piece is for ratchet, solo ratchet. It's a percussion instrument. You see it here a little bit. But I had to modify it. So this video shows the modification process. I'm not going to play now the whole thing. I had to take it apart, change the order of things, put it back, right? And
sorry, Panayiotis, how did you call the instrument?
How did I do what?
You called the instrument. How is the name?
Ratchet. It's the name here, ratchet.
Ah, ratchet. Okay.
It's the one that you normally make a lot of noises in as well. So eventually I ended up with this. Okay. That's supposed to be the other way around, but I changed the order. And then I also needed something more, and I developed a completely new part of instrument, which I call it bow stick, which looks like it started from this piece of wood. I made several modifications. I did put rosin bit. Then I could do various new sounds, right? So as a composer, as you see now, I'm a designer, I'm a carpenter, I'm making instruments, I'm modifying instruments. I'm recording, of course, field recorder person. So my job as a composer is no more I'm sitting in front of the piano or my desk with a piece of paper and a pen and compose. It's much more tactile. I'm really involved with it. And therefore, I am the sound and I become sound because I have to do all these things to reach the goals of what I'm hearing, right? Then I have some sort of process, pre-compositional process, where I'm analyzing, recording sounds, listening carefully, what kind of possibilities I have here, what sounds can I get out of it before I start putting this information together and compose the piece. And then comes the notation part, which you see here. The notation is quite like a manual. Here you see the ratchet, and each section tells the performer where to play around the instrument and how to play it. Over here, that's more like a tablature in the old times. And down here, this section shows the sound quality. It's like a sonogram, so to speak. It shows how the sound should sound. Because although you do this thing here, you still don't know if that's right. So how high is it supposed to be? How fast? How grainy? Is there any other elements I should consider? So this gives you a little bit of idea that here there is a little bit of clicks and clacks. Here there is more rough sound. Here there is less rough sound. Here something goes up. It gives the performer a clue about how the sound should resonate. I will play a little bit of this video. The section. And so on. So that's also a way I had to reinvent myself to make sure that I express my ideas on the paper in as efficient way as possible. And I had to develop all these different symbols and images to explain to the performer what I need to do. By the way, there is a video on YouTube. If you search either the Scorefolder website, my name, or in this website or composer workflow, you can see the full video. It's about 15 minutes long, how I made this piece in more detail. So another aspect that expands upon this is the use of my connection to the nature and the use of animal sounds and natural sounds, which is not a new thing. It goes back thousands of years. People were observing the sounds of the animals and even notating them. This is from 17th century, the image you see. But there is descriptions from the ancient world trying to imitate sounds of the nature and sounds of the animals. And I'm doing that a lot in my music. For example, this is the sound of a Mexican bird. Okay, and you hear it, you see it here as well, notated by ornithologists, and also here in a more musical way. And here's a moment in my piece Asphyxia, a piece for ensemble, and that's the clarinet part, measures 52. Right, not very different. And not very different from the bird and its way. So I'm using a lot of these processes of, I take a model from nature and then I analyze it and resynthesize it in a way with instruments, sometimes with electronics too, right? So there's an analysis or a synthesis process using sound models from animals. So again, we've heard this clarinet sound, which doesn't sound very clarinet. So in the process of modifying instruments and building instruments, I have developed this ultra thin synthetic reed, as I call it. And here you see how it looks and how I kind of make it. And that gives me a lot of possibilities. Here I will play you a few of them. When you don't touch the reed actually, but you just blow. Or when you go very deep into the reed. Right? Or here. Or I will play maybe on more here. Quite evocative sound, right? These certainly remind animals, birds, and stuff like that. The last perhaps thing before maybe open up some question, similar in my piece Hippo, which I mentioned earlier for trio, the piece begins with a sound recording, a field recording, which is this. Two hippopotamuses in the river. I don't know if you ever heard hippos talking. This is how it sounds. So I just now isolate the first second of it. And then there is synthesis with a trio. Right? And the piece continues as exactly the hippo dialogue. So again, the first minute or so, it's pretty exact translation of what happens between the two hippopotamuses, and is translated into the piece. A little bit what Messiaen was doing, but in my opinion, in a more complete way. I'm not considering only pitches and rhythms, but I'm considering the sound as a whole. Because for me, again, the sound is the only unit I'm using. If it has pitches and relationships, I'm going to consider that too, of course. I'm not disregarding that, but it's not only about pitch and rhythms. It's the sound, all of it. Last thing, a sound, once it becomes sound in our brain, as we said, then it can bring to us memories, right? It can bring to us emotions. It can bring to us even smells, images, feelings, ideas. So I'm composing all these things. I'm not interested in composing only pitch relationships, rhythmic relationships, or even sound relationships. I'm interested in composing what all this that the sound actually encapsulates in it. A sound is not just a sound, it has all these elements in it. If you hear a sound, you can be totally satisfied. It can bring all these moods, emotions just to you, memories, and you can be totally satisfied. If you just hear a tone from a violin, you're not going to be satisfied. You need relationships between tones. But in sound composition, one sound alone could be complete. Of course, that would be enough, wouldn't be enough for me. So I'm composing sounds and combining them. But even one of them, it's very important. One note, when you compose a piece, is not important. You can just use any note, perhaps. You can just ask your friend, your mom, your dad, give me a note, and that will be the first note of your piece, no problem. The second note becomes a bit harder. The third note a bit harder. So as you add more notes, you have to think more. But with sound, even the first sound is critical. You have to think a lot. What is the sound that you begin the piece? So maybe I'll put here a full stop or pause and ask for any questions, and maybe we can come back to it.
Great, Panayiotis, thank you very much. We can go to the questions then, yeah?
Sure.
Sure. Bueno, si alguien tiene preguntas, pueden hacerlas por escrito, pueden hacerlas en persona y serán traducidas para el profesor. Así que antes de tomarme yo la palabra, le vamos a dar a quienes levantaron la mano. Creo que Soledad es la primera que lo hizo. Sole.
Hi, thanks. I will try to speak in English just to practice. Thanks a lot, Panayiotis. I found it fascinating, and I would like to know two things. If you keep a kind of a library of sounds, I guess you do, and what, maybe if you can tell us a little bit how you organize it, and how open are you as a composer to any changes that for the singers or interpreters can add to the composition? Thanks.
Right. Good questions both. So I will share again my screen. So
Yeah.
I can show you maybe.
Sorry, maybe Manuel can translate it for the
Of course.
the question. Manuel, are you there?
Yes, I am. Could you repeat the question, Sole? Sorry, just for a second.
Okay.
Lo puedo decir en castellano.
Sí, Sole, sí.
Bueno, también.
Sí. Perdón. Si guarda una biblioteca con los sonidos y cómo la organiza, y cuán abierto está a que los intérpretes hagan modificaciones en la composición cuando la interpretan. That's it.
Okay. So let me share a couple of slides here. So this is I have a huge database which consists of, I don't know, 2 million sounds that I have built over the years, and I keep growing. Some of them are commercial samples, some of them are recordings I've made. For example, I have sounds of lions. I haven't made any of those. I haven't recorded any of these lions. Just these are commercial samples that I may use if I need to. So this is, for example, from the piece AI Fantasy, which I have used 563 sounds in particular. And this plot here shows these sounds divided in 11 clusters. And each cluster has the sounds within each cluster have something in common, right? So that's one way I am reading this data. And then if I go one step forward, here you see the same exactly clusters, but I call it a sound space ecosystem. So here we see the sound field, which is the whole thing, the whole piece. It's a sound, right? It could be just a 10 minutes long sound. And then we see it has clusters. The clusters are these single colored areas. This is a cluster, but could be also nested clusters. This is bigger than clusters, which includes multiple clusters in it, which have something in common. They're still different, but not so different. So this area here is much more different than here. It wouldn't be a nested cluster, but those two clusters here, the green and the orange, they could make a nested cluster. Then it goes down to classes. Classes are smaller areas of within the cluster where the sounds are even more close. Then we have subclasses, and finally the sound units, which are its individual sound. Perhaps I could show you a more detailed example, but maybe not now. And another thing I may do is using this tool here, which also sorts the sound by similarity. So I give here my query, and then the program will tell me, given the sound database I provide, which one is the closest to it temporally, right? So these are some of the tools I'm using to implement that. I even have somewhere a very simple scale I've made with the similar structure of the flute. Let me maybe find that. Yeah, there you go. So this is the standard techniques from flute, from 1 to 11, and it goes from kind of noisy to harmonic sound. Okay, so we've heard something which comes from noise attack to harmonic rich sound. And this is a scale based on the timbre. And therefore, if I want to make a holophonic musical texture, I may use those three, or those three which are close to each other and they can fuse together. If I want to separate two things, I may use a key click with multiphonic, and this will keep the two timbres apart. So this allows me to navigate within my database. This is just a very simple with 11 timbres, but imagine with 500 timbres. Then I need for sure a computer, and I need a little bit more mechanized process. As for the performers, absolutely, I allow the performers to interpret and to be open to the results within certain limits. So what is very important here is what differentiates the pizzicato sound we just heard from the tonegram, right? They have to understand the difference. They have to understand how to make tonegrams and then pizzicato sounds. And once they understand this difference, they're free to vary it. The problem is sometimes with sound, when sound of a dog ends and the sound barking of a coyote, which is a wolf, let's say, starts. How do you distinguish this difference? It's sometimes not so clear. And our brain also has hard time sometimes processing this information, where one sound stops and then the new sound begins. And is it the same sound or something in between? So there is an ambiguity there. Moving from one sound to another, there is a space, which is also very interesting for the performer to navigate through the space. So how you move from pizzicato to tonegram, that's also something new, I think, for the performer that has to deal with. It's not like necessarily from trill I'm playing a staccato note, but there is an area between those two, between trill and staccato, because there is a lot more nuance. There's a lot more sounds. Also the sound and the movement here are kind of decoupled. So if you play, for example, something on the violin like moving like this, which is supposed to go from low to high, may not happen that. May just happen even the opposite. May sound like goes from high to low. So there is a separation here of movement, expectation, and sound. And the performer also there has some room of interpretation and of freedom to control that that relationship. But yeah, it may sound, it's very, very maybe difficult or strict, but it's not more than the notes, right? The notes are very dictatorship, like you have to play that note exactly, not a bit higher, not a bit lower, it's wrong. With sound, there is more flexibility. As long as you know where the limits are and you can separate, distinguish the sound A from sound B, you have a lot more freedom there. And the notion of error, you made a mistake, you are disqualified, is not as, is not there, it doesn't exist, there's no error. It's a good sound, not so good sound, not so different, but there's no error really. And that's something that I like. I don't think there is room for mistakes in music. It's a notion that I'm not in favor of. And I think this allows me to eliminate that idea.
Thanks a lot. Fascinating. Thanks.
Muy brevemente, en la segunda parte de la respuesta sobre los intérpretes, el profesor está explicando que da mucho espacio para la interpretación y la libertad de los intérpretes, siempre que entiendan las diferencias de grados de sonidos a los que él está refiriéndose o definiendo, como en ese ejemplo que nos dio recién. ¿Ya? Y que en cualquier caso él no está por la idea de que exista la idea del error en música, sino que pueden haber distintas calidades o cualidades del sonido, pero no en una lógica del error. Hay dos preguntas más. Primero había hecho por el chat Andrés González la pregunta que voy a leer en español, y Panayiotis, there's a translated question for you in the chat,
right,
by Manuel, if you can see it. I'm going to read it in Spanish for the rest.
Okay.
Andrés pregunta, me gustaría preguntar si puede profundizar en la idea de formalización del sonido, en el entendido que la forma fuerza una especialización del sonido. ¿Por qué es necesaria una forma, o morfopoiesis, para un fenómeno eminentemente temporal? Después de esto le damos la palabra al profesor Rodrigo Cádiz.
Right. Well, I can explain a little bit more what I just described before, and I will show you again a slide or two. And hopefully that will answer a few of these questions. So in a piece of mind for clarinet and electronics, I'm now focusing more on the clarinet part, the instrumental part, but the same applies also to the electronic part. So here I created two modes. One is based to harmonicity, and the other is based to brightness. And here you see also what I was talking before: clusters, classes, subclasses. So here we have these are the classes. So I have slap sounds, different type of slap sounds. So that will be then different units within the slap class. But here I have also different subclasses. So I have slap roll. Okay, it's not very different from this, but still different enough, right? Or I have this clap sound, which may have its own subcategories, let's say. So this creates for me, again, a continuity from slap to squeal sounds. So this is made using IRCAM's CatArt. It's a software by IRCAM, and you can utilize that to do similar things. Another map of this is here. So you see here the sounds I just described before, the clap, the taps, the grunts, and so on. These are the clusters, the air sounds. And then we have the classes where the clap, for example, has the clap stop and the clap flow. These are two different sounds. And again, the performer has to be able to play them. And then within the clap stop, there is different dynamics and different variations, which I call them subclasses. And then there is sound units, which each forte may have multiple variations of it within the clap and clap stop sound. So you see, it's like a root system that moves from top to bottom here, kind of vertical. A similar one according to another way of description, which is the noisiness. This is about brightness of the sound. So that's one element I'm utilizing. Let's see if I can show you here. We can see that in the piece, how it's integrated. So it moves quite fast from slap to grunt to squeal. Then there's a breath, and then from grunt to squeal to grunt. These are all different sounds that the performer has to learn. Let's see what else maybe I can say about the idea of morphopieces maybe, but here another structuring process is that I have these four different approaches: the tiling, procedural, stochastic, and phrasal. And what that means, for example, the stochastic, the performer plays these attacks, which are like voiceless letters on the reed. It's a baritone saxophone, but it's not really predetermined in very precise way. Going back to the performer, it's pretty open. It sounds like that. stochastic elements in the pieces, where things are not very fixed. There is some flexibility within them in their order. There is others which are procedural from the same piece. A success of a sequence of events that grows, and that's I'm calling procedural. I have a tiling process and the phrasal process, and these are ways of structuring and formalizing my sound materials. I hope that answered a little bit the question. We could talk a lot about it.
Profesor Cádiz.
Gracias, Federico. Hi, Panayiotis, how are you? So I was wondering if you, because I see that you transcribe, I don't know if that's the right word, you know, like sound morphologies into the score. I wonder if you use any computational tool like Orchidia or anything like that, or you do that by hand. And maybe my more general question is, when you're writing something that is not based on a sound model, do you think it the same way? I mean, do you compose the same way, or is it a different process? Lo puedo traducir al castellano. Le pregunté en concreto porque él lo que hace es transcribir mucho de los sonidos en partitura directamente, y hay formas, hay software que hacen eso. Le pregunté si usaba algún software particular pregunté por Orchidia, que lo hacen en Berkeley. Y también le pregunté si cuando compone obras o compone música que no está basada en un sonido previo, como los ejemplos que ha dado, si piensa distinto o lo hace igual. Esa es un poco mi pregunta.
I have Orchidia and other tools like that. Not so useful for me the way they work right now. Most of the times the tool I use is just a sonogram. I can maybe again share my screen and show you just quickly. So I will just analyze using a sonogram my sounds, and then there I may identify specific pitches, specific rhythmical elements, and try to model them and recreate. So it's quite intuitive and kind of manual process, but certainly our brain and our analytical mind it's quite powerful yet. It's just not good when we deal with big data, right? So when it comes to big data, I use these corpus-based tools, computational tools, but when it comes to just modeling and sound, I would just use a sonogram for the most part in my ears. For example, here I have a door sound. When I synthesize it, I come up with this. So it's a very organic process. So I'm listening, I'm seeing things from the analysis. I go back to the analysis, I keep trying, and then eventually I have the sound I need, and then start thinking, how do I notate that? And how that could be then useful to a performer, which is also a very challenging part. And often I integrate video recordings, sound recordings to explain to the performer how to do these things. I hope that answers some of your some parts of your question.
Yeah, sure. Maybe you didn't answer if you're. Do you ever compose music which is not based on a previous song? In that case, how do you?
Not lately, for sure. If I need somewhere a note, within the piece there will be maybe a bar or a second where I have really 5 lines and I have C note.
I think you got muted somehow.
We can hear you now.
Oh, I think you got muted.
You're gone. Your sound is gone. Yeah, maybe shut down and turn on. Yeah, now. No. Wow.
That will help. Do you hear me now?
Yeah. But
So,
but it comes and goes. So in and out. I don't know why.
so if I need somewhere to have notes, ordinarily, I will represent them with notes, right? And that's a possibility, but it's a very small. It's like, I don't know, 5%. Tone. It's just one possibility. 20 more. It is, So if I use that a lot, I will use notated normal notes, but I still think of it, it's a sound, it's not a note. In the end, I may put like a note on the score because it's kind of easier for the performer. I'm not gonna reinvent. If I need to say something, 5 notes, 5 lines in G clef. But that may be just a moment in the piece. And they still, however, in my mind is like a sound. It's not 5 notes in success. It's just a sound that sounds like that.
Okay, thank you.
Muy bien, creo que estamos en el tiempo. We are on time, Panayiotis. Vamos a agradecer muchísimo al profesor y también a todos los asistentes y por la paciencia, tanto de los problemas técnicos como por el inglés. Hay aplausos por todas partes. We thank you deeply, Panayiotis, for your presentation. We are happy about the questions too. And well, maybe I have some further question for you, but I have your email. Maybe we can keep talking. Le decía que hay más preguntas de mías y de otros probablemente, pero vamos a poder mantenernos en contacto. Lo mismo que si alguien quiere enviar alguna pregunta o comentario más, se lo podemos hacer llegar. Les agradecemos a todos quienes vinieron y quienes participaron también, especialmente a quienes preguntaron, y gracias Pía y al equipo de posgrado por acoger este coloquio, y seguimos en las próximas ediciones.
Yes.
And yeah, if you have any questions or you need anything in particular, feel free to email me and I will be happy to be in touch.
Yeah, that was what yeah. And thank you, Panayiotis. Maybe the sound and the technology today made it a little harder, but everything was clear and and worked just fine. Thank you, Manuel, also for the translation chat. And to everybody, nice weekend, buen fin de semana, y nos vemos la próxima semana.
Chao, que estén bien, gracias.